So I think that the best finance, and this is not just CFOs, this is operators. The best operators understand we aren't here to operate within our own department.
Yeah.
What we're here to do is grow this business and make this company wildly successful. And so if you take a company first mindset to everything, then you kind of either put it in your hands to help the business or you shy away from it.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Why, thank you, Fat Joe, and welcome to Run the Numbers, where I interview world-class CFOs, operators, and the investors who fund them on how to get the most out of your company's performance. This podcast is a playbook of sorts for ambitious people in the worlds of finance, strategy, and operations. Today, my guest is Aneal Vallurupalli, CFO of Airbase, an AP automation, spend management, and procure-to-pay solution. We spend the hour talking about fraud and how to avoid it, as well as the different categories of spend outside of payroll that CFOs are trying to get under control or optimize. More specifically, on this episode, we cover managing the people and recruiting team as a CFO and the parallels to building sales pipelines with candidates, what makes a good value metric and how to identify your own company's value metric, risk management and how a CFO chooses which risks they are willing to underwrite, the non-payroll expense types that seem to trip people up the most, and how the payments ecosystem is evolving. This is a masterclass in risk management. As a company that moves billions of dollars a year, Aneal explained how Airbase's number one product is really trust. I think that's a lesson that all CFOs can adapt to their customer interactions, whether they are moving money or not. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. Leapfin.com. Mercury knows your financial operations are complex. Founders and finance teams have to pull together different tools, reconcile transactions from different sources, and struggle to get accurate answers. With Mercury, you can simplify your operations with banking and software that power your critical financial workflows, all within the one thing every business needs, a bank account. And with new bill pay and accounting capabilities, you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 200,000, ambitious startups that trust Mercury to provide the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows so they can perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust. Members FDIC. I'm getting good at that voice. Aneal, what's going on? Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
I'm going to start this in a non-finance place, which some people out there are probably like, whoa. You've managed the people function before, including recruiting. That struck me. Why should every finance person manage the people function at some point?
Yeah, it's a interesting place to start. I think that, I had obviously a really good people leader and a recruiting leader as well, but I think that one of the main pieces is that we have to live beyond the numbers in finance, right? And so, I can simplify it to even say, what is it like to build a financial model and expect new hires, right? The most tied to revenue, call it being SDRs or BDRs or AEs, and to actually put yourself in the shoes of the talent team trying to hit those numbers, right? Because it's similar to pipeline and hitting numbers on the sales side. You need pipeline on the talent side and recruiting side to hit those metrics. And then beyond just, call it the talent side. The overall people function is one that, takes a lot of soft skills and empathy to understand how to operate the business and to understand their circumstances where that oftentimes change a playbook. And so how to, live by doing what's right by the employee and the company as well as, and finding that balance is something that, oftentimes is not a skill set that you learn coming up the ranks in FP&A or corp dev or accounting for that matter. So that's why I always say it's helpful to be exposed to the people team and legal and all of that at some point in your career.
And something I learned being on the FP&A side, because like you mentioned, Aneal, like 70 to 75% of most tech company costs they walk on 2 feet. And being a recruiter is kind of like having a quota. Yeah,
that's completely right. I mean, it is very much like having a quota, and also setting up that team, the people team and the talent team to succeed with that quota is very important, right? And so you end up learning best practices. How can you align on ideal candidate profiles ahead of searches beginning, right? How can we as the hiring managers and leaders actually help the talent team pattern match for what does a great candidate look like ahead of time? So it may take 6 weeks to build pipe for a role, but what if it only took 2 weeks? If you got really aligned on the ideal candidate profile and what does great look like? So similar to that, right? On the sales side with marketing, what does a really good MQL look like? And then what converts it to an S0 or an S1 faster or create a higher conversion rate? It is very much like managing a pipeline.
Yeah, it seems like you can learn different things from both sides of the coin where, from what I'm hearing, Aneal, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of brought a process optimization mindset to working with recruiting. But at the same time, you can get lost behind a spreadsheet and just think, move that widget over there, move that widget over there. And you start to have empathy for why certain things don't fit in certain places.
Yeah, and I think that one of the pieces is that, when you're looking at a financial model, oftentimes you'll say, okay, are we hiring to plan? And are we not just timeline wise, are we hiring to plan, but are we hiring to cost? And so in FP&A, that's where you kind of you put your hands up, you say, as long as that's happening, we're all good. We're good. But there's nuance to that, right? And so when you're actually the manager or the leader of the people team as well, you start to look at, how fast are ramp times? How can we drive down ramp times? Okay, we're hiring to time, but how do we drive down ramp times? Wait a minute. Are they getting to quota on time or not getting to quota on time? Are we enabling them fast enough or not? Can we actually rethink our location-based strategy or not, right? And what makes sense for this company specifically right now? So I think these are all different factors that you start to understand, live beyond a financial model, but are actually more important than the model because they dictate how a company operates and the likelihood of success, with the lagging indicator being, commercial success.
Yeah, and the more that I've seen companies evolve, I start to think that there's not just like a 3 to 5 year model that you have within like an FP&A or financial operating model, but you have that on the talent side too, because you want to be able to build like these centers of excellence for different functions in different areas. And I would assume that working with HR, you probably sit down and say, well, what do we need to hit within the operating plan within the next 12 months? But like, where do we want to have our staff globally or within this country? Is it in 2 states or 27 states over the next 3 years?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I worked in Airbase. We've always been remote first since company inception, but the company I worked at prior to this was not just remote only, but it followed a model similar to GitLab, which is you had a list of 10 countries you didn't hire in. Not a list of 10 countries you did hire. So the complete flip, right? And it was an open source product. And so we hired from the open source community a lot, which included thousands of developers, right? On a monthly basis, contributing code for free to the platform. And so obviously that was a great breeding ground for some really talented engineers that came to us and were already, knew our code and familiar with it. And so, I think that company was in 35 or 36 countries and was a startup, right? It wasn't Google in 36 countries. I mean, we had a talent team, an overall people team of like 8 or 9. And we were including the talent team, right? And we were in 35, 36 countries. So, you kind of get to a different level of understanding location strategy and how can we drive, a talent pool that we want to increase in, right? We may end up finding that There's a region in Europe that has amazing talent. We found this really good community member who we were able to have join the business. Now, how can we find more of her or him, right? And bring in more of them in that area so we can have some concept of like a center of excellence, right? Even without, physical office space. So all those nuances exist.
There's a lot of planning that goes into that, because sometimes as a finance leader, you'll be talking to the HR team and you'll be like, are we just getting pulled into like Estonia because we have one rock star there, but we don't know like if there are more people around it? But sometimes it's actually like, what do we just stumble upon? Like all these people over here can code in Kotlin. It's like a attractive cost to be paying for that. And so you kind of have these puts and takes of being like, are we being brought into a region versus like, is this a long-term aspect that we want to pursue as a business?
Yeah, and I was constantly asking those questions because at that business, the full G&A function, which included the legal team as well, and IT and all that jazz kind of reported up into me. And one of the considerations was, unfortunately or fortunately, right, which made me appreciate the remote model, was that these businesses like remote.com and Deal weren't really around then. They were very nascent, right? They're very small at this point. We're talking about 8 years ago. And so remote.com and Deal, everyone knows now, these are the PEO organizations that, you can fire up and spin up a PEO super fast in the country and use these businesses to help you get that done. Whereas previously what would happen is you would end up spending a bunch of time to understand the legality in certain countries. So example, like in France or Spain, what's the recommended number of employees where the country actually asks the employees to form a union before you hire? What's that number there? What's the average days from start to hire? Similar like in India, where it's 60 to 90 days oftentimes, right? That you actually have to give notice to their former employer. How hard is it to let go of a person in a country? And what does that look like, right? And having oftentimes in some countries in Eastern Europe, having to go to, a committee to have it approved and things like that. And so, unfortunately or fortunately, as I mentioned, those things are now plugged in my brain forever, as I've had to live through those things, both positive and negative. But nowadays we have the benefit of these businesses like remote.com and Deal and the legacy players as well, obviously, that are out there kind of helping us as operators be nimble and not have to spend as much time on the how-to in a country.
Yeah, my life changed the day I learned out what a work council was.
Yeah, exactly.
I do want to talk about payments in Airbase a bit now. So there are two main categories of payments. If I was to use my simple FP&A brain here, payroll and everything else. And so the way I see it is at Airbase, you're managing everything else. What historically is, if you had to just pick one, Aneal, what's the one subcategory within that everything else that typically causes companies the most heartburn?
Yeah, it's hard to say what the specific biggest issue is in cross. So let's talk about all the non-payroll side, the everything else side, right? Companies typically spend money in a few different fashions outside of payroll. One is their accounts payable automation, or AP. That's how they're paying their vendors. Two is physical and virtual corporate cards, right? So one way you can spend, right, not just with your vendors, but on T&E and travel for employees. Three is expense reimbursements. How do you reimburse your employees quickly on behalf of the company and put money back in their wallets, right? So they're not out for a long period of time. And the fourth thing, which is now a newly developing category and over the last couple of years, is, this category called intake. And so that's really the procurement side of things. Think of it as the front end to how a request gets generated internally and then appropriately routed. So guided procurement, which is what we have, this intake platform kind of sits above everything, underneath which there's AP automation, expense reimbursements, and physical virtual corporate cards. So the pain point, you asked me, what is the biggest pain point? The pain point is relative, right? Every company feels like they have a burning pain in one of those areas at a differing point. Now, what I can tell you is probably what are the more complicated things to build, right? And the more complicated thing to build really is the AP side of things, where you're moving money across, hundreds of countries, hundreds of currencies, facilitating ACH rails, right? Dealing with partners, sending FX, and right, do I want to send USD to GBP, USD to London from the US? All of those nuances. So on our side, when we find that we're solving an AP and an intake, a guided procurement problem, we know we're in the right spot, right? Because we know that's the stickiest product overall. And we do believe expense management is very necessary. We've got a lot of customers switching to our new expense management product that we've revamped, replacing Expensify a lot, to be quite frank. And then we have a lot of customers. The majority of them have some level of virtual cards and things, as that also helps to facilitate payments out. So really, to summarize, AP guided procurement is probably the stickiest and most complicated thing to solve, which is where we at Airbase are kind of guiding more up market. We're now doing this for 9,000, 10,000 employee companies. Whereas when we started Life, we were doing it for like 200-300 employee businesses. So as I've been at the company for the last 3 years, consistently going more up market.
I like how you said it's all relative, because at certain companies you have different problems that are just like a total pain. In my experience, it used to be contractors paying contractors, but now that we work with a remote or a deal, that's become less of a pain.
Much easier.
Yeah, I know it changes. I never thought it would change, but it does.
Yeah, you used to back in the day probably had to figure out how to sign up a contractor on what type of paper in what country, and then pay them via Wise or something like that, right?
Yeah,
and get money to them. And then oftentimes then they would be debating, wait a minute, why is my payment different on this day versus that day? Well, there's some tweaks to the conversion rates, the FX rates. And you're like, well, like that's just part of working with us. You're going to see that, right?
yeah, and it's like, do I take the FX risk or do you take it? And there's always that debate. It was such a pain. And then you'd have to figure out like what account you would send it to them. And sometimes they'd have to actually go to their local bank to receive it, depending on the country. And so it wasn't just like it was hard to send money. It was like the operational risk and headache around that too was a total pain.
Yep.
I'd say now though, paying for events. So like software is more straightforward to pay for. Like it's either a 1, 2, 3 year contract. Sometimes it's monthly. You usually know how much it is. But I'd say events on the marketing side is something that I've typically struggled with. And maybe it's just because the event providers either bill you way ahead of time before the event happens, and you have all the financial stuff in the back end to accrue for it, or they're always super late on it. And you've already had the event and it's just messing up your financials and trying to figure out how to pay them.
Regardless, the sentiment is that we on the AP side always feel like we're being asked to fire drill pay for something.
Always.
When it comes to events or some of the marketing, third party spend, I'll put it that way, program spend.
Yeah, but I guess it is all relative. And at the end of the day, it is money out the door from the company.
Yeah, and Airbase, the beauty of Airbase with our guided procurement product is we can track all that, right? We can actually monitor, what is our biggest fear in finance, right? Is that we're paying out this vendor that nobody's had eyes on it internally. And suddenly we're out the dollars and we're kind of left with our finger in the dam. And so ultimately we want to avoid that scenario. And so that is really guided procurement is helping with all of that. Before you, CJ, go to make the payment, you're seeing that not only has legal approved the contract, marketing had eyes on it, someone in accounting's reviewed the payment terms already. FP&A has already approved it, right? So you're like, all right, this is ready to pay. It's ready to fire off.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Quick math, the less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. And back by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please do it, guys. I really need this. Cash is king. As the CFO of a SaaS company, I know firsthand how important it is to maintain a healthy AR balance. If you can't effectively manage cash, you can't service debt, make payroll, or invest in growing your business. That's why I'm so excited to partner with the sponsor of today's episode, Maxio, the leading billing and financial operations platform for B2B SaaS. Maxio helps top SaaS companies like Chili Piper, Crunchbase, and Stack Overflow get cash in the door faster by automating collections and dunning. Gone are the days of manually chasing down invoices. Join the 2,500 plus subscription businesses using Maxio, formerly SaaS Optics and Chargeify, to eliminate revenue leakage and streamline order to cash. It's never been easier to get paid. Visit maxio.com/run the numbers to supercharge your financial operations in 2024. Not only does requesting a demo using the Run the Numbers link help support this podcast, ya boy, you also receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. Woo! That's maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Before I became a CFO for the first time, I was reading this story about this biz dev guy who worked for the Sacramento Kings, a basketball team, and he was essentially creating invoices with very similar names to like Kaiser Permanente, but then he would change like LLC to like Corp at the end. So it seemed like very similar. Yeah. Do you remember this story back in the day?
Yeah, I do. And by the way, that's one of the biggest things we launched. So the risk team and those folks roll up into me here at Airbase and payment operations. And so what are we doing at Airbase to protect our customers? Well, we are scanning every PDF and actually scoring it for, is this a real invoice or not a real invoice? So that is a very major common vector for having fraudulent transactions be paid out. Things we're also doing in real time is we're scoring every single payment in our network through Airbase. And so we're able to stop payments where we're seeing things that are occurring that are a little funky. So let's talk about, worst case scenario, CJ, you go to pay that. It's instead of Salesforce with an S, the second S, it's a $. You didn't notice it. You go to pay that out, and it just so happens you spend $1 million with Salesforce a year now that it's Tableau and Slack and all these things that are kind of lumped together. And so what are we doing? We're actually able to monitor the vendor payment details. So let's say the vendor changed from Bank of America or something like that to some small credit union or something to that effect, in a regional area. We're actually able to monitor those payment details and say, wait, this is nuance. There's something weird going on here. Let's hold payment and stop payments to this vendor right now, and monitor that. So we have an example of a customer that was spending, not a big customer of ours, spending, call it $40,000, $50,000 annually with us, which is by no means, a large customer for us. But that customer was sending upwards of $2 million of payments to a single vendor. They were able to be hacked. The vendor was hacked. The vendor's email was breached, and someone was sending out legitimate invoices and changing the payment details behind it. And so our customer going to pay that now fraudulent vendor ended up sending out $2 million plus. So tell me what the ROI is when Airbase is able to stop that payment, return the dollars back to the customer. It's almost like an insurance policy in itself.
Yeah. And I didn't come from an accounting background. I came from FP&A kind of strategic finance background. So I was scared. I've never been the one who's had to actually finger on the keys, approve these things. And so when I heard that story about the guy with the Sacramento Kings, I was like, that's kind of like a mistake that could somehow find its way through the system. So the idea that you're scoring it based on all these qualities is a pretty neat concept.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, lots changed the last couple of years, right? We work closely with a few different tools, one being Sardine. And Sardine's a really cool company that's helping, score those transactions, also reviewing PDF, viability, whether it's a real invoice or not. It's, it's monitoring actions being taken within the platform itself. So clicks and things like that. We're doing that as well. Because there is certain pattern matching you'll see when fraudsters get into an account, like how fast do they start going to different things versus what do you do in a regular course of business?
And I want to flag it to all the first-time CFOs out there. I swear within the first 3 months of me starting, there were probably 50 texts and 50 emails sent to people around the company saying that they were me, because people hadn't communicated with me before. They don't know how I talk in an email, things like that. So I was definitely a mark that fraudsters are looking for to go after. And similarly, I got an onslaught of stuff that was not real invoices to pay, because they're probably this person's in the chair for the first time. They don't want to mess anything up. And they want to make sure everybody gets paid on time if it was an existing vendor. So if you're coming into a new role, just go slower and have your spidey senses up, because there legit are people out there who are probably filtering LinkedIn for like, who's the new CFO who could screw up for us.
Totally. So like, we I can't remember what we called our CEO founder, Tejo. We had a name for him a couple of years ago when it was fake Tejo, basically.
Yeah, because so I'm CJ, and when the fraudsters do it, they say it's Carl. That's my government name for all you out there. So in our Slack channel, people will put it in and be like, Carl's asking for like gift cards again.
But they do the same thing with me. I mean, my AP team came up with some names. And so, no, I think, there's definitely, for those out there listening, there's very basic, policies you can even put in place internally. Like anytime you want to change a vendor payment detail, call someone first internally and make sure it's real. Anytime, Carl is sending a request, call CJ to make sure that it's real or not real. Right. So it's almost like our archaic version of two-factor authentication or three-factor.
Yeah. I do want to talk about risk management as well. And you mentioned that you manage credit risk, which is really important as a company that moves billions of dollars. And so if you were standing up a risk function, Aneal, from scratch, where would you start?
Well, it's a great question because we did do that here, right? So when I stepped in the door, 3 years ago, while PMs were caring about risk, we didn't necessarily have a dedicated risk function. And so the first place I started with defining what do we want this mandate to be? What are we doing here, right? What does success look like in 12 months and 24 months, right? And it wasn't just me dictating that. It was me writing it down and then working with my CEO on it, right? Because, we need to form then a management risk committee where decisions are made, right? And so there's not, one group or even Tejo and me that make decisions unanimously. Right. We actually have now a management risk committee that formal decisions occur there. It's a basic thing you put in place. So you start to look at risk, right? The different angles are, what do we want governance to look like? What do we want the risk operations to look like? What does good and great look like there? And where are we today? Well, how do we work to that? So almost like a roadmap, a product roadmap. There were things we had to do that we could control our own destiny and the risk team with regarding tools that we could implement. But there was also things we needed our product to do for us to interact with those tools. So it was important we work with the PMs to get those things there. And then subsequently, where do we want to staff this thing? And how can we have some unit economics that make sense with it while also making sure we're protecting every dollar as much as possible that our customers are pushing through our platform? I say this all the time. We're in the, yes, we sell subscription software. We're still in the business of trust. And so, you have to be able to trust where you the partner that you help with on your, call it procure-to-pay problem. So we take that trust very seriously and we make decisions accordingly based on that and being a huge factor as to, as being in business. And it's been a concerted effort. Every quarter has been build on the risk side.
You mentioned having a committee. To get more tactical, what's an example of a risk that would arise to the committee's level to review?
There's a lot, right? So talk about customer fund security in SVB last year, right? So in-flight funds and the security there, what's the update? Do we need to move money around and make sure it's more secure or less secure? Another example could be we want to implement a new KYC third-party vendor, right? And this is what it could look like. Another thing could end up being, policies around, we have offerings internally here at Airbase, things like faster payments, right? Where the typical 4 to 5 day ACH, right? Time frame it takes for you to send a payment as a customer to a vendor is usually 4 to 5 days. What are we doing in Airbase to underwrite you for faster payments, meaning 2 to 3 day ACH, where you send the payment to Airbase? Instead of us waiting for it to clear our account, then pushing it, we have eyes on it, visibility on it. We've already underwritten you and we can actually push money fast as soon as we have a confirmation that you've sent the money to us. So there's all those types of nuances there where you want to make tweaks like they're features, but in the end, it's risk management. And so even me, right, we all have our own roles to play in that management risk committee that's ultimately for the benefit of the customer.
What are some of the non-payment risks that you try to manage? And I ask because Michael Tannenbaum used to be the CFO at Brex, and he was actually our first podcast that we did. And he said that he thinks about his role as the chief risk officer in a lot of ways, like he's the only one playing goalie. And I sometimes now think of myself like I want to help the company play offense, but I'm also like primarily the one on defense. So what are some of the non-payment risks for the company that you manage?
Look, the non-payment risk could even be like advocating for features being put on the roadmap, right? That we need that are actually not related to payments at all, but could be related to visibility and KYC and documents and submissions. There's a whole host of things, and I don't necessarily think I've ever thought of myself as chief risk officer. I think I heard someone actually mention this to me on our podcast, Jim Cook, yesterday, ex-CFO of Mozilla.
Yeah.
He told me he's always thought about this concept of chief alignment officer. And so I think of myself more honestly when I thought, I was like, wait a minute, that is literally what I'm doing every single day. I'm trying to align the organization on where are we investing our time and our effort and what is the output we want from that. So really what I'm trying to do is align all these functions, right? We have a really good VP of risk and AML compliance internally here, right? That was an investment we made that we knew we needed to. Now, how do I align that function, the product function, the pre-sales team and communication and these efforts, the post-sales team, which now, post-sales reports up into me as well. So like onboarding and CS and renewal account managers, how do I make sure they have the right appropriate talk tracks for our risk frameworks internally for our customers, existing customers? So it's really what we're doing is we're trying to align all these functions. While product at some point sometimes really wants to push velocity in certain areas, it's my job to make sure that we're also getting the alignment that risk is a key thing we have to factor in.
So you're saying risk is people not being aligned and time not being well spent, if I heard that right?
Yeah, I think so. If people aren't aligned, then decisions are being made in a vacuum. That's assuming that if you have the appropriate level of trust or respect for the risk function itself, then you've got an alignment issue.
Yeah.
Right? If things aren't going in the right direction.
Someone once said to me, like, if you don't take any risk, you don't really have a company. Like you're working essentially at a high growth tech company, a startup, and you're being funded to innovate. And if you don't underwrite some level of risk, like what are you doing it for? That's
very true. And so I would say that there's stage and growth appropriate risk. And so finding the appropriate balance and aligning with your board of directors, right? Your largest investors on in what ways are we taking risks today, right? We literally have a risk roadmap that we share with our board, right, every quarter. And we're saying here.
Can you say more about that? A risk roadmap?
Yeah, we have a product roadmap. We have a risk roadmap. What are the things we're doing this quarter, right? What are we working on to make better? How does that dovetail into like a larger theme that we're trying to push across the business this year? And so, we think about the risk function like a product internally.
That's crazy. I've never heard of a risk roadmap. So going into each quarterly board meeting, are you updating this for like, hey, this is a technical risk, this is an execution risk, this is like a time allocation risk? Is that, I don't know, am I getting it right?
Yes, that we do that, but what I'm saying is that the risk team and the operations behind it has built out roadmaps that are aligned to, what are we trying to drive right now as a company? And so, if you think about when we're moving billions of dollars, as you mentioned, of our customer funds annually, and we're in the business of trust, then board meetings are not purely about where did we hit our subscription number or not.
Yeah.
Right. When you're in fintech, it's beyond just hitting a subscription target. It's okay, how do we look in terms of benchmarks and the risk that we're taking? Right? Knock on wood, Airbase has always been best in class, actually beyond best in class in that area, in terms of dollars and type of fraud we see, because we invested early, right? On the frauds, on the risk side to mitigate some of that. And so how can we make sure that we're continuing to innovate in a stage appropriate way?
Stage appropriate. So there probably is somewhat of a crawl, walk, run to all this.
Completely. Yeah. It has to be.
And Aneal, you'd mentioned that there are billions of dollars moving around. And I've also heard you on other podcasts talk about value metrics. And you just alluded to there that, there are financial metrics or operating metrics or risk metrics. I want to talk about value metrics. And to start, can you just define what a value metric is?
Yeah, it's a good point. So, when I started when I started working more at the post-sales team about 2 quarters ago, I started to notice, and this is very typical at a lot of companies, I started to notice that we had really good customers who were deriving value out of the product. And we had other customers who also we knew were perfect ICP for us, but were on a journey that was not one that I liked. I thought we could do much better for them. And I think that's a fair statement to say at any business, right? We're never going to hit every customer perfectly.
Yeah, totally.
But what can we do more to showcase the value to our customers and also help them understand where they stand in certain areas? And what I mean by that is that I mentioned to you 4 key, modules that we sell here at Airbase: the intake side, right, which is effectively a request to spend, right? There's the AP automation side, which is paying your vendors; the expense management side, which is CJ trying to get me to approve his expense report; the physical and virtual card side. Underneath every one of those modules are 3 or 4 or 5 value metrics. And what that means is that, as an example, I just told you guided procurement is an intake request module, right? So what is the value that we're driving there? We're actually taking days request down materially. So when you don't have guided procurement implemented, we see that customers oftentimes take 40 days plus to approve an employee's request to spend on a software. Now we have public company customers here at Airbase that are doing that within 2 to 3 business days, right? So that means getting IT, InfoSec, legal, accounting, FP&A, manager approvals, all occurring within the product itself versus over Slack, text, email, phone calls, right? Which is chaos. So that's the chaos of spend. That's one example of a value metric. Yeah. Another one that's similar in that mind could be an expense report. So average days to approve an expense report, what you'll see is that is many times 30 days plus at businesses that don't focus on it. Well, we have public companies that do it within 48 hours. And so what if I told you, CJ, that your business is doing it, you have Airbase, but you're only doing it within 8 to 9 days. And our best in class looks like 1 to 2 days. Do you care about that? We can actually show you how to get there. Why don't we talk about that during your next QBR? So it's a way to not just, prove that we're a good vendor, but it's a way to actually manage your customers onto a really good journey that gets them to maximize the value out of the product. Not just some hard dollar value, specific ROI type thing.
I like how it steers away from the hard dollar stuff, because if you nail the value metric right and align it to how a user gets that aha moment, like it'll show up in the dollars eventually.
Yeah. And by the way, all of those modules I just mentioned to you kind of sit under one North Star metric for the business, which is we've defined as spend under management.
What's that?
So think about it as all of your non-payroll OPEX.
Spend under management. So is that like the monthly amount of total spend?
If I can capture 80 to 90% of that spend all in Airbase, then I know we're in the right direction.
I like that a lot. It packages it nicely into one view of what success looks like.
We always get asked in finance, hey, what's your GRR? What's your net retention rate? Can I see your cohort analysis? But you start looking at some of the greatest companies that have been out there, oftentimes consumer focused, but like in Facebook, right? I think they had a metric where if you refer a friend within the first X number of days, like you're 90% plus likely to be a long-term user of the platform.
Yeah.
So that was like the thought process that Tejo and myself were thinking through when we were looking at value metrics the last few quarters is, what are those things that are naturally happening that we're doing great things for our customer, and how can we codify that a bit more and be a little more explicit about discussing it?
I think value metrics are always there, but they've really had this kind of revolution with the age of usage-based pricing, because in order to price something in a usage-based model, you have to get down to the value metric. It can't just be a financial metric.
Yeah, and I think it took over even more in not just usage-based, but in product-led growth motions. Right. So in the PLG motion, usage-based, by the way, is a pricing mechanism. PLG is, I would argue, a company motion. So usage UBI, right? Usage-based insurance is an example. Usage-based, like that's how you charge. But PLG is literally how you go to market, how you develop, how you staff the company, the foundational elements. My last 2 companies have been PLG motions.
Got it. Yeah, at my company, we're a usage-based company, PLG, high velocity configuration motion. And one of our North Star, I guess North Star metric, you're only supposed to have one. So our North Star metric is how many customers can we get to 5 orders within 7 days? And to someone on the outside, you're like, how the hell did you come up with that? It's like, we know that a customer will be successful and stay with us like 98% of the time if we can get you there. So it's looking at customer behavior and saying, like you had alluded to, like, it's not just like, what's the net dollar retention of that cohort? For us, it's how many customers or shops within that initial start cohort were able to get the 5 orders within 7 days. I have a much better view on how they'll perform for our business than just using like a naked net dollar retention rate.
Totally. And stated another way, is what I'm hearing behind the statement is you've understood to a statistical relevancy that there is a leading metric, like what you just mentioned, that impacts a lagging metric, which is a high net dollar retention.
Boom.
So how do you get our processes internally and even product managers? So if you appropriately implement value metrics at your company, it doesn't just change how we monitor things in finance. It actually changes how we think about developing features and game for adoption to get to that metric.
That's good. That's good, because there is a real product mindset to it, because you don't want to be adding features that are pushing core user behavior in a different direction. It should all be aligned to driving whatever that North Star value-based metric is.
Totally.
That was awesome. Can you think of any other value metrics at just other companies you've observed? I know you said you worked at a couple other PLG companies. It could be any company out there. It could even be like a Snowflake or a Datadog or anything you've heard anecdotally.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a whole host, right? So, like, my last business was a company called Mattermost. It's basically a secure version of Slack, right? Is another way of putting it in the most rudimentary way. It's now gone even more high trust. So, you're talking about thousands of users at the White House, tens of thousands at Bank of America. You know, the U.S. Department of Defense uses Mattermost to communicate between the Joint Strike Fighters and base and stuff like that, right? And so, we knew there were certain value metrics there in terms of hours spent in the platform on a daily basis, or number of messages or keywords sent over a certain amount of time. At the company before that, I worked in a business called Mapbox, which is essentially a more secure version of Google Maps, where it wasn't reselling data on the back end. So like Tableau was a customer of Mapbox, right? So it's map embedded in the product. Lyft for a while there was also using Mapbox for turn-by-turn directions. And so, you know, each one of the products at Mapbox is multifaceted, right? There's a base layer of a map. There's turn-by-turn directions. There's third-party data information that's being added onto the map, right? So like points of interest, POI data. And so how did we know how to get the most out of each one of those areas? We used to track value metrics for each one that we could tell by industry. So Tableau probably cared about, you know, the number of map refreshes or number of requests to tie a map to an account in Salesforce.
Yeah.
Right. So what if you're a rep and you want to see where your company is or where your prospect is, and you also have access to Tableau? There's like a map in Salesforce you can take a look at. And so when I refresh it, I'm getting usage from it.
That's great.
So there's a whole bunch of, you know, ways to think about it. In the end, what you're trying to find, if I were to simplify it, as I stated earlier, is you're trying to find the set of behaviors that your users and customers are taking, the successful ones. What are they doing and what are they taking in the product, the steps they're taking, the actions they're taking that are leading to them being successful when they renew? Because the idea is if you can rinse and repeat that success, then you're really impacting the lagging indicator, which is retention rate, net dollar retention rate.
It reminds me of a conversation I had with Ben Williams, who was VP of product at Sneak, a cybersecurity company. And he was saying, like, well, how are you defining active user? Like, it should have some instance of like they're getting value out of it. It can't just be like they're logging in. It should be linked to like the core use case that you want them to demonstrate, which will that'll show up in money eventually.
Yeah, here's an example of where that definition can be funky. So, you know, any one of us that use Salesforce probably have Salesforce up at all times, right? As a tab open.
Yeah, but you're not even looking at it.
So, like Salesforce for the longest time, I think it still does this. Active users if you're just logged in, right? And so, like, is that right, or is it really? What do we really want? The metric,
Probably run a report.
Yeah, the reason we want it to be like that metric is because we want to understand, are these customers using our product, right? We're not really necessarily caring, is this like, do you want a vanity metric or do you want a metric that's going to change the way you operate and make decisions? On a vanity side, you would probably just say, you know, whatever is the lowest, you know, action you could take, so it looks really high. Whereas if I'm really trying to make decisions, then active user is probably something where I'm like an action taken, like an opportunity typed in, a report viewed, you know, a tab clicked or something to that effect.
Yeah, it takes me back to how in Silicon Valley they had this vanity metric, and it was a view of like if you were active or not, but it was how many downloads they had of Pied Piper, and they hit like their billionth download, but then they didn't realize like once everybody downloaded it, they hated it and didn't know what to do within the app, so everybody just churned from it.
Exactly. And the one piece that's helpful is that if you have your value metrics defined appropriately, you can actually tie different metrics and what you believe they should be during the customer journey.
Mm,
So if you map your value metrics then from called day zero, you sign a contract as a customer. How long does it take to implement that product? What does it look, what do the value metrics look like at post go live, day one post go live, right after onboarding? What do they look like after day 30 post go live? What should they look like a month before your first renewal in year one or year two? And if we take a perspective on that, then you're actually trying to drive the customer journey towards taking actions that lead to those successes.
that's awesome. So you're taking the customer journey and deconstructing it into value metrics and leading indicators.
Exactly what we've done at Airbase. Yeah, we've done that here at Airbase, and we've started to do that with our full post sales team. And ultimately, I believe that a lagging indicator for success is your renewal rates and your net retention rates. And I do believe that in most cases, unless there's something very unique happening in an industry, I do believe that 80% plus of those issues that you're seeing, we can control. We just need to focus and put in place the right process to improve them.
Aneal, is there one metric that when you wake up in the morning, it's the first one you look at?
No, because I have a lot of dashboards I look at. We've been pretty maniacal here at Airbase in terms of we've got the data analytics team reports up into me as well. So we've changed the data map of the business and we made it to where we get real-time reporting on where we are on the quarter, not just where we are on subscription, but where are we on in gross payment volume, card payment volume, bill payment volume, FX volume. We have daily goals, right, that are pumped into our called Snowflake, which also pushes out to Tableau. And so every morning, our leadership team and leaders across the company get all these reports in email, and then you can click it and go into Tableau directly to view.
I like that a lot. And something that benefited my business a great deal was this year we switched from having a lot of our metrics being monthly views to making them daily views. Yeah. So it's really the same goal. You're just bringing it down to a more specific level. And that gives you a better pulse on how the business is trending.
Yeah, totally. Annual, you're trying to get a sense for what direction are we going as a company. Quarterly, are we kind of on path to doing that? Monthly is, okay, can we get to the quarter's goal or not? Daily is what actions are we taking?
Oh, that's good. Because it's specific enough where you can take an action in the moment and pull a lever.
You can react to it, right? If you're tracking, we have daily goals, not just for bookings on the new and expansion and contraction and churn side. We have daily goals for every stage of pre-sales, for MQLs, S0s, S1s, S2s, S3, right, to convert. And so we can track by the motions, what do the daily goals look like? Are they adding up to where we want to be at the end of the quarter or not? And we use obviously historical data to inform what we want those daily goals to be in our plan, right? These are all part of our board approved plan.
Nice. On each podcast, I ask the same question, and it's, what qualities do you think separate the good CFOs from the great ones? In your experience, how would you unpack that?
I kind of mentioned this earlier. If you take a frame and say we're really chief alignment officers and not chief numbers officers, then we really are perfectly situated to get and leverage and understand and consume data.
Yeah.
Right? Unbiased data. Get to service, review, synthesize, and understand unbiased data. The problem is so what do you do with all that stuff? You can spend a lot of time with your teams and cross-functional partners and help them understand why the data matters, which that's fundamentally has to happen. Or you can also then go one step further and say, I play a role in helping lead this company and align this business for positive change that we think is going to beneficially impact the company. So I think that the best finance, and this is not just CFOs, this is operators. The best operators understand we aren't here to operate within our own department.
Yeah.
What we're here to do is grow this business and make this company wildly successful. And so if you take a company first mindset to everything, then you kind of either put it in your hands to help the business or you shy away from it.
I love that. And we spoke with John McCauley, CFO of Calendly, and he said, look, CJ, when you get to CFO, I can no longer say like my department's great, your department sucks. Like I'm responsible for the performance of the entire business. This isn't like a department by department thing. It's ownership of performance holistically.
Totally. I mean, we take ownership of it. Look, we got that plan approved by the board. So we put it out there.
Yeah.
You don't hit it or you hit it. We all share in that ownership together. We all made those decisions together. So we can either decide to take a part and a role in making positive change, or take a back seat and let other folks, kind of handle it. At which point, I feel like we in our careers get to see a lot, right? We see a lot. Whereas the majority of other functions are kind of siloed in their areas to hit certain goals. We in finance are kind of living, and why it's most aligned for chief alignment is where your revenue teams are living in the quarter or maybe into next quarter.
Yeah.
We're living 12 to 18 months, 24 months in advance and trying to envision what could be. And so if you can see that either we're going to flourish or a train wreck is going to occur, what are you going to do to take us in the right direction?
I like that a lot. Like, you're the one who has to voice back if you have these leading indicators. Like, hey, I know you guys are looking at this quarter, but like, I see a big wave up on the horizon.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to take us into what we call our long ass lightning round. So the first question, what's an example of something you've screwed up on the job? It can be here or a previous role throughout your career stops.
I necessarily can't think of one specific thing that was wildly bad, but what I can say is how I needed to shift mindset. And I think that my career definitely took a different path and a different trajectory when I started to think a lot more about, this is not my department, this is not my team. My job is to ask a lot of questions and to understand how is this company operating broadly, so then I can take a lens on what do I believe the future could look like for the business. And so more importantly, what that meant is that there was this mindset shift that I had, which was really around trying to understand the question behind the question with people.
That's good.
Right. And so when your board asks you a question, there's almost always certainly a question behind it. Right. And your job is to 90 to 95% of the time figure out that question behind the question accurately. So what that entails is, number one, being able to spend a lot of time with people. Number two, being able to understand based on where this person is, what they care about, what they're working on, pattern match what you believe the things they care about are. Understand the situational awareness. Right. So I think that wasn't necessarily one thing that was like, oh my gosh, like this travesty occurred. How could this happen? But it was definitely a need to be able to understand the question behind the question. And that led to me being able to provide significantly more impactful thoughts, right? And impactful thoughts that I think helped companies, right? And more importantly, helped our leadership team, helped our leaders, our CEO, and helped our board understand what we need to do.
That's great. Can you walk me through your finance software stack?
Airbase.
There we go.
Airbase does a lot for us. So everybody listening, get Airbase. We've got NetSuite. We've got Airbase.
What are you using the BI side?
BI is pretty built out here. So I'll tell you, on the tax side, we're using Anrock. Use Anrock. Anrock's really good.
Nice.
Kind of a more new age up and coming player versus Avalara, right? On the data side, we're using, so when I joined the business, the company thought that Salesforce was the system of record, the system of truth for everything.
Yep. Everyone goes through that.
Yeah, and everyone goes to that. I came in and I was like, that's not going to work. We need to, first of all, start with the metrics and the definitions we care about as a business, and then figure out how we plumb the company to get those things, appropriately reported and accurately, whether on real time or daily or monthly basis. So we've got, the typical setup with, Snowflake and all of that jazz. We've got the high touch, like the re-enrichment tool to be able to send the source data back to these source systems. Example, how do I pull in Marketo, Zendesk, Heroku, AWS, NetSuite, Salesforce, all these into a central data warehouse? And then how do I re-enrich tools with that now collated information? So how can I ensure that a customer success manager, before they hop on a call with the customer, knows what their usage data is? Yeah. Right? Knows if they've paid their latest bill or not paid their latest bill. Knows if they've used in a certain time frame, knows what their card volume has been, et cetera, or what their specific terms are in their agreement. So it's the infrastructure we've built is really around trying to put data in the fingertips of the people that can do something with it in their specific area.
That's awesome. Last question. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen someone try to expense?
So I'd probably combine it into something probably from investment banking way back in the day. If I go from craziest,
Okay.
right? So I used to, for a little while there, I was in investment banking on the M&A side, tech specific, and even more specific, like 80% were software deals where I helped, buy and sell those companies. And somebody tried to expense like a $35,000 afternoon with bottle service and all this stuff and kind of split that up across the clients. So I'll say that's probably the most
35 grand.
egregious thing that I've seen. But Airbase expense management can help you with that, right?
Yeah, what about it? That's a good day out on the town.
Yeah, exactly, right? That's right.
Nice.
Those days I don't see anything as egregious anymore. I feel like COVID, that's one of I used to see much more interesting T&E requests and approvals, expense management approvals pre-COVID. I feel like COVID helped settle things down a little bit there for a while.
Yeah, but some of like the mental health and wellness benefits that companies were letting people expense were crazy. I think it was Ivan Makarov of Webflow said that somebody expensed a chainsaw because they said that it was for gardening outside.
Stress relief.
Yeah, stress relief. Yeah. Beware working with that person. Hey, Aneal, this has been a blast. Thanks so much for carving out time and jamming out with us.
Super fun. Thanks for having me.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.